Hey everyone, welcome to the Mobile User Acquisition Show. In the Mobile User Acquisition Show, we feature interviews with the smartest folks in mobile and growth who share invaluable, actionable, tactical insights on every aspect of mobile growth and marketing, not to mention some adjacent areas just as well. The Mobile User Acquisition Show is presented by me, Shamant Rao, CEO of the mobile growth marketing firm Rocketship HQ, and produced by Karishma Sundaram, our superstar content marketing manager at Rocketship HQ. Each episode includes strategies, tips, and pointers from the leading edge of mobile growth marketing that you can use to unlock tremendous growth for your app in a sustainable and capital efficient manner.
What does it take for an indie studio founded by someone with no game design experience to achieve 100 million downloads? Our guest today is Sheetal Bairamadgi. Sheetal is the founder of Crikey, a game studio based in Sydney. After working with a number of apps during her tenure as CMO at Leadbolt, Sheetal decided to start her own gaming studio, Crikey. Crikey has a number of games to its credit, and its most popular one to date is Phone Case DIY, which got 100 million downloads within a couple of months of its release. In today's episode, Sheetal takes us through the journey of how she envisioned Crikey and how she and her team refined the processes of their ideation and research from their early games that got lukewarm responses to their first big hit. This conversation again proves that it's possible to build hit games by focusing on research, structured processes, and data, even if you don't have much formal game design experience.
Very excited to welcome Sheetal Bairamadgi to the Mobile User Acquisition Show. Sheetal, welcome to the show.
Hi, Shamant, how are you?
I'm good. Thank you for being on the show. Very excited to have you, especially because you have navigated a transition that almost nobody I know has, transitioned from ad tech and marketing to being a game developer. Again, considering the overlap between these two worlds, you would think it would be more common, but it isn't, perhaps because it's just, even though we swim about in the same sort of pools, the kinds of skills you need to be a game developer are very, very different. And you've not just navigated it, but also succeeded. You've done very, very well for yourself as a game developer. I'm excited to jump into and explore and tell the story of your journey in this episode.
Sure thing.
Yeah, I would definitely love to start at the beginning, right? So you worked for a number of years in ad tech. What inspired your transition to game development?
I guess I have got over a decade of experience on the ad tech space back in the days where ringtones were pretty popular. I guess my experience started there. And as the industry progressed, I moved on from promoting ringtones to promoting apps and understanding how the whole ad tech works, ad serving works, monetization work, app installs, and so on. And I think that's something that I did for a very, very long time. So I kind of understood the whole ecosystem of serving ads, how does the ad network work, and so on. And I think after doing that for over a decade, for me, saying I want to do something different and obviously making sure that it complements the experience and the skills, what I've learned in the past 10 years. So it's just a curiosity to understand. And once you work with a lot of game developers, you would be like, oh, what would things look like sitting in their seat? What would a user acquisition manager goes through? What numbers do they look like? And how does Facebook stats look like compared to, an ad network stats? So I think that it was just a matter of curiosity and speaking to a lot of people, just wanted to see the other side of the spectrum, I guess.
Yeah, and it certainly is a big shift. Among other things, on ad tech, you were mainly on the business side, not so much on the technical side. So I imagine the technical aspects of game development would have been one of the things that's been a big change. So what were some of the things you did to educate yourself about the technical or the engineering aspects of being a game developer?
Yeah, I guess that was completely new to me. And this was not something that I was going to sit and code and do the programming or understand the game engines like Unity and so on. I wanted to probably get somebody who can complement my skills on the development side, who is pretty much me, but on the game development side. And that was my first hire, who was a technical production manager, who understands coding, the game mechanics, how to develop games, and so on. So it's not that I didn't learn that, but I think it was more of education for me. And that's what I wanted. I wanted to know the other side. How does a game development work? Like, we can have an idea, but how does it actually come into action? And what are the level designs? How does the game design document look like? All these things is something that I've learned over the past couple of years, but it's not something that I do on a daily basis. I've got a team who does that, and obviously I've learned a lot. And again, it kind of worked perfectly into what I have experienced in my 10 years. I've seen the other side, which is marketing. I'm like, okay, is this what the audience needs? Where is the audience? That was my thought process, and kind of went very well with the technical skills that the team had. Saying, okay, this is how we do it. And I was always looking from the marketing perspective. Is this game marketable? Is this a trend right now? Or is this something that will work on Instagram or TikTok or wherever we would prefer to run? And I think that was definitely a huge learning curve for me. And it was exciting. And it was something that I wanted to do when I started my gaming studio.
Yeah, so it sounds like you leaned on what you were already good at, which is marketing and understanding what was happening in the market. You hired somebody that was good at the execution side, the technical execution, and you were able to spec things out for them to get started. Tell us more about your first game. What inspired the idea for the first game, just because it's just a universe of possibilities to pick from, and how did this game perform in the market?
Yeah, I think when I started my gaming studio, the whole hyper-casual games was a huge trend. And the reason for the studio was also doing something really quick to develop and not too much production time. And that's where the hyper-casual games came into my picture, saying, okay, these are the games that I wanted to develop, because one is they're very quick to develop. Two is, yes, I understand that the life cycle is going to be very short. But given that I was bootstrapped and that was the trend, it was a no-brainer for me to pick up the hyper-casual games. And the first game that we had was a very simple runner kind of a game. That was, again, a huge trend back then. Learnings, definitely, when we started developing the game, it all looked good. It looked very polished. It was a typical hyper-casual game. But I guess when we came to the marketing side, it was not as simple as it looks. The CPIs were high, and then we were turning down the monetization. And if we do have too many ads, people were dropping off. So it was the first time that I'm actually seeing the whole side, because I only saw the one side of the business before. And it was definitely, those were our challenges of how to balance the CPI and the monetization and the ROI of the game. And once you get that right, how do you scale? I guess we learned as the game progresses, as the testing goes on. There was a lot of things that we didn't learn upfront, I guess. And once the game was live, we were like tuning the game, making the levels easier upfront so that the user can get used to it, because the game was pretty tough and those were the reviews. So we were kind of tuning the game as we're running the marketing. So definitely the first games were not as simple as it looked.
Yeah, I think it can be easy to look at the hyper-casual games out there and say, oh, this is easy, I can just do this. And then you're like, wait, I need to balance the ads economy, the difficulties of the levels. And out of curiosity, it sounds like you were doing this on the fly. Were there any resources you were looking to and saying, oh, this is exactly how I can design the levels? I'm just curious if there was anything that was helpful in speeding up your learning curve at this point.
Well, at that point, I guess we were just going from the feedback that we're getting from the users in terms of reviews and what they're posting on the ads that we were running. We have some focus groups that we had. They were pretty much saying that the game is pretty tough to play. So then immediately we were like, adjusting the speed, adjusting the levels of the game. And it was all on the fly, yes. Marketing the game while you're testing, you will lose the position in these networks. You pretty much can't pause marketing.
I know you briefly alluded to how hyper-casual was a trend at that time, and that inspired you to make your first game hyper-casual. I'm curious if you can share what that decision-making process was for that first game, or even your subsequent games. What is the research process, and how the research itself translated into the actual games?
The research is, I take all the trends that are going on, like TikTok, YouTube, Instagram, Reels. These are the major channels that you constantly look at to see what the trends are, what are people playing these days. And the other thing that you can definitely check is the top charts in both App Store and the Google Play Store. And you can see that some of the games come to the charts and then disappear. There are a few games which are sticking there for a longer time, right? And you know that it is due to the game mechanics that they're using. People love the mechanics, or there is something right that they have got. And I guess those are the two research items we look at. And then we list up the top 10 games that the team likes. And every Friday evening is the session where everybody comes up with a game and they have to tell us why they like the game, how we can use that kind of a thing in our games. Those ideation sessions from the team, from myself, definitely helps because one, it gives you exposure to the outside world of what the other studios and what is the trend right now. And two is how to make use of those trends into our game. Those are two go-to points for us. The social media videos, two is the top charts.
Interesting. I'm very curious about the Friday ideation sessions. Also, because if I understand correctly, your team is fully remote and asynchronous. So tell me more about the structure or the format of these Friday ideation sessions. Do they screen share and play? Do they make a PowerPoint? Do they make a spreadsheet? Just help me understand the mechanics of how that works.
So as you mentioned, everything is remote. I started in September 2019. I had an office, but I had to shut down due to COVID. And since then, I've been working from home. So it's come 100% remote. The ideation sessions started just 3-4 months into lockdown because you can have dinner while you're playing or you can have drinks as well. Because it's also the end of the week. We want to, chill down and see what we have done for the week. So it starts actually on Monday where everybody is given it. It's not a task. They need to play some games in the Play Store, which are there in the top charts or something that are emerging. You can see some of the games are in the hundreds in the top charts, but you can see that you like the gameplay. You can play any gameplay and it usually sticks to simulation, hyper-casual role-playing games. So because those are the categories that we focus on. And you kind of come back to us saying, one, which game are you talking about? What's the gameplay? And why you like the game? Because it's all remote. Once they say, this is the game that I'm talking about, everybody downloads and plays the game on the fly. So while the person is talking, everybody is actually playing the game. So we're all on the same page talking about that particular game, of why it interests them, what did they like about the game. Sometimes it's about the color scheme. Somebody says it's very light. Somebody claims it's very bright to the eyes. They also need to make further decisions saying, okay, how can we implement that into any of our games using the same mechanics or taking that as our inspiration? How can you come up with a new game? If they've done this, we can do this. And that kind of worked very well. I tried it for a month and it worked very well. One, because I think the team got together. And two, there were a lot of ideas, like some of the things a developer can have. He can talk about something that he has seen, which is not even an app yet. Something is seen on YouTube or a Squid Game or the Netflix show that was running. And I think that was pretty interesting for us. And the whole process worked out pretty well. Sometimes you look at a few things and then you're inspired by some of the apps. And then you're like, okay, this is what we can work around it. Let's do a prototype. And we all agree on that.
Interesting. Is there an example of an idea that came out of this ideation process that actually became a game or a feature that you used in a game?
Definitely. There was something very interesting of one of the games that we really liked. It was the sand cutting game from Crazy Labs. And we really liked the game just because of the ASMR feeling that it had. It was very relaxing and so on. But we wanted to give it another angle to the same kind of cutting. I think what we did is a bit different to the present game. We were cutting the game, but we were actually telling the shapes that the user has to make from the game. And that definitely came into our ideation sessions because we found that the game was pretty relaxing and it definitely helped in our prototyping as well.
Oh, and I do know a number of ads at least have been inspired by that, if not games themselves. So certainly a mechanic that has wide appeal, and great that it is something your team caught on. In fact, what you said, Sheetal, just reminds me of something that came up in another interview. I believe this was with Mishka Katkov, a deconstructor of fun we had on this podcast. The interview is about what makes for great gaming studios. And he was like, look, we were looking at one of these Call of Duty mobile studios, and they spend their entire Fridays playing games.
Yes.
For many outsiders, it would look like this is such a waste of time. But when you look at it, you're like, we're in the business of making games. We should be playing games. He also added, look, it's hard to isolate what makes for successful studios. But I can tell you, all the studios that I have seen that haven't played their own game or haven't played their competitors' games, it's just very, very hard to succeed, just because they're not plugged into the market. And I think that tees up with what you just said. And I think it's very instructive that you made it a very intentional part of your ideation and design process.
Because you never know where the concept comes from. And I think that is very important. The concept need not come from a game designer or from myself or the stakeholders. It can come from anywhere. And I think that's where the gaming studios need to work closely. The game developer need not just work on the coding. He can be a part of the ideation sessions. And I think that's been my process in the beginning, and it helped. I think the Friday evening has become a trend right now with us, and we definitely spend more time there. Also, we have a Slack channel dedicated to apps that we would like the team to play, and then we can discuss on Fridays as well.
Right. And out of curiosity, like the folks who take part in the ideation session, they're across the team. Is it just a subset of the team, like somebody who's doing the actual development and yourself, or is it like everybody, including the folks who do QA?
It's everybody, the whole team. It's the game designer, myself, the production manager, including the artists as well. The artists are also involved because sometimes we're talking about the app icon, for example. The app icon is a very fascinating thing. People don't pay much attention, especially on Google Play. When we did a lot of A/B testing, we found that it actually makes a huge difference. So what do we like about the app icons? Why are they so bright? And there's a lot of discussion on the art side as well. What colors to use, what color scheme, the animation. What did you like about these animations? Can we do this in our next game? And it's the whole team.
If I understand correctly, you guys put out the first couple of games before you guys came up with an eventual hit. What were some of the games that were not huge? What were some of these games? And what, if any, were learnings from the games that didn't work out that helped in the eventual game that was a hit?
Obviously, there's a lot of learning from each of the prototype we tested. One is the CPI was good, but the retention was low. No point in progressing with those kind of games. And so then we learned, okay, so guys, we need to focus on retention as well, because yes, the CPI can be low, but if we don't have retention, you kind of have a failure. So we were like, okay, we need to focus on retention. So the next prototype that we were focused on, we were building retention. And retention is usually built with content and meta in the game. And I guess that's where we learned from each of the prototype that we failed on, and saying, okay, so the next game, it needs to have a great concept, some content, at least 20 minutes of 15 to 20 minutes of gameplay to actually go into testing. So how do you build content? How do you progress levels? People get really bored with hypercasual games if it's repetitive. You need to give out few things every few levels. So I guess that was the learning process for us. The first prototype that we did, we didn't have all those. And as we progressed, then we found out, okay, you can get the CPI right, you can get the retention right, but the CPI is actually, related to the creatives that you run. So the first thing that you have to get is the creatives. The higher the CTR, the lower the CPI. So those were the things that part of our learning process. So now when we think about the concept, we are now thinking about what creative should we run in marketing. I mean, this process wasn't there like 2 years ago when we started.
I find that so impressive just because you didn't have a formal game design background. And that's actually helpful because the vast majority of developers who have game design backgrounds or who have experience in gaming, they start with the game and the game mechanics. And it sounds like you are thinking as much about the creators and distribution as you are about the game mechanics, which eventually is so critical to scale and distribution of the game and financial viability for what it's worth.
Exactly.
Right? Just to switch gears a bit, I know you briefly alluded to your team and the first folks you hired. Tell us about your first hire or the first couple of hires.
The first hire was definitely the technical production manager, who was technically very sound, has over around a decade of experience in programming, coding, managing developers and artists. And he was himself a coder as well, so very hands-on. That's exactly what I was looking for, the skills that I don't have. And I'm a very hands-on person on the marketing side, but I was looking more on the technical side and the programming side, which I didn't have. So that was my first hire.
Were there any challenges in particular that came up while hiring and growing a team that you think could be helpful to share?
I had a very small team and I didn't want to grow too fast just to get everything right. This was completely new to us as well. So I took baby steps, didn't hire like a group of developers. I think I had 2 developers, 2 artists when I started. And then the production manager was managing them. The challenging part was definitely because my understanding of that side wasn't that high. I think we took longer than I thought to launch, just because it was a learning curve for me as well. And once we got up to speed, I think now we are in a better shape. I can understand, what timelines we're looking at, what is the game design document. So we are in that stage. Like if anybody says, okay, what about this app icon or this app icon? I'm like, let the data decide. And I think that information wasn't there. And obviously the COVID situation, because I couldn't travel, couldn't hire, so it was all remote, didn't have that personal connection with anybody. And I guess I need to talk to them face to face. And that was a huge bummer for us.
Right. Tell us more about a hit game and what some of the winning games you've come up with have been.
So while we were working with our prototypes, and one of the prototype that we were ideating was a phone case. The idea simply came from one of the YouTube videos that we were briefly looking at. And I'm like, this is a huge trend right now in the market where teenagers usually want to dress up with their phone case, and especially the Asian audience is what we were targeting. There's a video of the game on YouTube, and I put it on my Slack channel saying, guys, what do you think about this idea? And everybody got super excited. And then we started researching about it. And there was a lot of videos around this, but there was no game. And then we went back to the drawing board on one of our ideation sessions. I think we spent almost a week on just ideation. Again, the steps were different. The first idea that we were talking about is we'll tell the user what the design of the phone case would be, and they have to just design that. And that was the first idea that we had. Give the user exactly blue, red, purple are the colors that you have to use. This is what you have to design. And I was like, there's so many games right there. I think there was Ice Cream Maker. And I was like, what happens if we give all the elements or all the ingredients to the user and the user decides how to make it? So completely make it, DIY. And I think that was the idea. It was not the phone case. It was not I think making it a DIY game, giving the user all the tools and things to show them and let them be creative about what the design they would do. And I think that was the hit idea there. And then as soon as we came to that stage, we were like, okay, what about the content? And there was so many videos, and we keep coming up with content. Okay, we can do glitters, we can do, phone rings, we can do, so many things to add on. And then it became like a full-on game, and there was so much content that we can keep adding. And based on what I just said before, these were the things that we've learned. A good concept, not on the store before, have a lot of content behind the scenes and something unique about it. And I think that was the DIY element in it. And I think all these ingredients were there. And when we made a complete GED of the document, which was not just a simple one-liner, it was a complete 12 or 15-page document. It had all the research that we've done. What audience we're going to be targeting? Which platforms are we targeting? What other games are there which are massively hit games? And I think there were two publishers. I guess one was Lion Studios and one was Crazy Labs. Both of them amazing at what they do with their tech stack and the way they spend on UA. And they've both got hit games. I've got lots of friends in both the publishing companies. And we went in with Crazy Labs because I think a lot of elements that we saw in the game design document related to their hit game Tie-Dye, which was a massive hit when we were ideating on our game. And I thought it would be a perfect one to approach them. And we went in with them, pitched the idea, and I think they were spot on. The good thing about Crazy Labs was they have seen so many games. They see ideas and concepts in and out all day. And I think as soon as they saw the concept, they knew there was something. And were chasing us to get the prototype up and running. We did a 5-level build, did a CPI test, and the CPI was amazing. Great videos for it. And, we got everything right for it based on the learnings, failures from our previous prototypes. And as soon as the CPI was low, I guess there was no stopping for the game after that, because we know we have a hit game. Content is there. We just have to roll out a proper game from there on. And I have to say, Crazy Labs has done an extraordinary job on the user acquisition for the game. I mean, literally it took off. It was December of 2019, a peak season for Christmas. The inventory is pretty expensive at that point of time, but I think they did an extraordinary job on user acquisition, right creatives, get the balance right, the monetization, and the game became hugely profitable on iOS, I think month 1 or 2. And then we launched Android earlier this year. And I think we hit like a 10 million download mark in 8 days,
Wow.
which was a huge achievement for us. And, we were like #1 game in 52 countries. It was amazing. And the best part was we were such a small studio. To see that on that store, we were just a normal studio. We thought, okay, yes, we're publishing a game, but not all published games took off like that, right? And I think it took us by storm. We were just watching and playing the game, and we were watching the charts. It was such an exciting journey. And to see a small, 4 to 5 people studio achieving something big and getting all the help from the Crazy Labs was, a dream come true. And I give all credit to Crazy Labs for the support that we got, given they understand that we were quite a small studio. And also, I think there were a few days where they were chasing us saying, is the build ready? Is this ready? Is that ready? I have to mention this. I have never seen any game publisher, anybody in my lifetime, where the publisher actually chases the studio for an invoice.
That is crazy. That's very impressive. And just to underscore some of the things that stood out to me in what you said is, the genesis of the game itself was in the idea that came off of videos that you guys were seeing. And you're like, there are videos, but there's no game. This is an opportunity. But the idea alone wasn't enough. You guys had the foundation of the brainstorming sessions, the ideation sessions that you had built up during all of the games that hadn't quite worked out. So really, it was the idea and the ideation and the development of the idea that was responsible for really taking that idea into a game that was really, really that scalable and that solid and that sustainable. Yeah, that's very impressive. I think it's easy to think, if you look at a hyper-casual game, you're like, oh, you just flip a switch, you get lucky. But I think the process of actually building this with the learnings from everything that hadn't worked out was so critical to having this be the hit that it was, right? And I definitely want to underscore all of that work and all of that effort that went into the set. And what happens after that? Have there been other games? What have you been working on since then and right now?
Well, obviously that game did 100 million downloads recently, so it was a huge achievement for us. And also gave me a base, and now we're planning on expanding the team. And I think that was very important so we can run multiple projects. The hyper-casual space has evolved a lot in the last, couple of years. So we're looking for more retention games. Yes, we might not be rolling out like a game every month, but we want to make sure that we get everything right and scale the game correctly. And we're also looking at self-publishing the games right now, because my journey where I've developed a game and actually promoted the game, keeping it all in-house. And I think that is what we're working on right now.
Great. Yeah, I think that's a big next step. But considering the big steps you've taken before, I'm sure you'll crack this. Great. Just looking back on your journey, starting with your first ideas, figuring out what's working, and actually coming up with a hit game and growing it and scaling it, and the future, right? If you had to start all over again, what, if anything, might be some of the things you would do differently? That could be with your processes, your hiring, or anything else.
I think I would have hired a game designer up front within the first hires. I think that was definitely missing in the game. I had it in the structure, but I don't think we hired a game designer up front.
And I know you had to figure out a lot of these things with your own research. So certainly I imagine that could have cut short some of that learning process if you'd had a game designer up front. Sheetal, this has been incredibly inspiring and instructive at the same time. This is perhaps a good place for us to wrap this conversation. Before we do that, could you tell folks how they can find out more about you and everything you do?
I'm mostly on LinkedIn, so you can reach out to me on LinkedIn. And if you want to email me, I'm at sheetal@crikey.io.
Wonderful. We will link to all of that in the show notes. But for now, this is perhaps a good place to wrap today's conversation. Thank you for sharing your story with us today.
Thank you, Shaman. Thanks. It was a pleasure being here.
For more tips, pointers, and strategies from the leading edge of mobile user acquisition, subscribe to our YouTube channel right here, or check out our blog, rocketship.hq.com/blog.